The first thing I noticed was that Derek only opened the door wide enough for one eye. Not one arm. Not one welcome. Just one pale blue eye peering at me through the narrow crack, while snow gathered on my coat collar and melted down the back of my neck. For a second, I thought maybe he didn't recognize me. I stood there on the front porch of Hemlock Pines with a pecan pie balanced in one hand and a red gift bag cutting into my fingers, my boots half buried in 6 inches of fresh Wisconsin snow, and I actually smiled. I smiled because I thought he was joking. My younger brother had always been like that, dry, awkward, a little cruel when he thought he was being funny. Even as children, Derek could say something sharp enough to cut skin and then grin like everyone else was too sensitive for bleeding. So I laughed softly and said, "You gonna let me in, or do I need to show ID?" He didn't laugh back. Behind him I could see warm yellow light from the kitchen. I could hear silverware clinking. Somebody was talking in the living room. The smell of cinnamon and roasted ham slipped through the crack in the door like a hand reaching for me. It smelled like every Christmas I had ever loved. Then Derek looked at me the way people look at a stranger who's knocked on the wrong house, and he said very quietly, "It's family only this year, Clara." At first I thought I had misheard him. The wind was howling through the pine trees behind me, throwing little needles of snow against my face. My ears were half numb from the 6-hour drive. My hands were shaking from gripping the steering wheel all afternoon. So I blinked and said, "What?" His jaw tightened. Family only. I remember staring at him. Really staring. Because sometimes when something cruel happens, your mind refuses to understand it at first. It just hovers there, trying to rearrange the words into something that hurts less. And because my brother had just looked me in the face on Christmas Eve and acted like I wasn't his sister, I let out a nervous little laugh. "Derek, I've been driving since noon." He glanced over his shoulder into the house before looking back at me. I know, that was the part that hurt worse than the words. Not that he didn't know. That he did. He knew I had driven through a snowstorm. He knew the roads from Madison were nearly iced over. He knew I'd called from a gas station 2 hours earlier and asked if anyone needed me to pick up whipped cream. He knew I was standing there with presents for his kids and my mother's favorite pie cooling in my hand. And he still kept that door 3 inches open. I swallowed hard and tried to smile again, because dignity sometimes looks like pretending your heart hasn't just been dropped on a frozen porch. Did Dad say something happened? Derek rubbed his hand over his mouth, a habit he'd picked up when he was lying. "No, it's just better this way." Better for who? He didn't answer that. Instead, he said the words I still hear in my sleep sometimes. "Clara, don't make this harder than it needs to be." And then he closed the door. Not slammed. That would have at least had honesty in it. No. He closed it gently, softly, like he was shutting out a draft. I stood there for a long time after that. Long enough for my fingers to go numb around the pie tin. Long enough for the porch light to hum above my head. Long enough to hear laughter from inside my family's laughter while I stood outside like somebody who'd come to the wrong address. I wish I could tell you I knocked again. I wish I could tell you I demanded an explanation. I wish I could tell you I screamed. But the truth is, I just stood there in the snow and realized something inside me had gone very still. Because sometimes the deepest hurt doesn't come as fire. Sometimes it comes as silence. I finally set the pie down on the porch bench beside the old sled planter my mother always decorated with holly. Then I placed every wrapped gift neatly beside it. My niece's watercolor set. My nephew's astronomy kit, the wool scarf I'd spent 3 weeks knitting for my father, the lavender hand cream my mother loved every winter. I arranged them carefully because my hands needed something to do besides shake. Then I turned around and walked back to my car. By the time I reached the driver's seat, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. For one wild second, I thought maybe Derek had come to his senses. Maybe my mother had seen me from the window. Maybe someone inside had finally asked why Clara's car was still in the driveway. I pulled out my phone so fast I almost dropped it. It was a text from my father, and the message said, "She really thought she was welcome." I stared at that screen until the words blurred. No greeting. No explanation. No, sorry. No, that wasn't meant for you. Just that one sentence. cold as the snow outside. My father had sent it to me by mistake. He meant to send it to someone inside the house. Someone who was laughing while I sat in the driveway. I don't know how long I sat there with the engine off. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe 30. Time feels strange when your life splits into before and after. Before that text, I still thought there might be some misunderstanding. After that text, I knew. They hadn't forgotten me. They had decided me. And as the heater finally began pushing lukewarm air into the car, I looked back at the glowing windows of the farmhouse where I'd spent every Christmas of my childhood, and for the first time in 42 years, I understood something I should have learned much earlier. Sometimes, people don't betray you all at once. Sometimes they betray you slowly, for years, while smiling at your table, thanking you for your help, and calling you family. I started the car, turned the headlights toward the long pine-lined driveway, and drove back into the storm alone. What I didn't know then was that by morning they would all be calling me, and for the first time in my life, I would let them. The road out of La Crosse disappeared under fresh snow so quickly it felt like the storm was trying to erase the night behind me. My windshield wipers moved back and forth in a tired rhythm, smearing white into gray, and the heater in my old Subaru kept making that clicking sound it had made every winter for the last 3 years. Usually that sound annoyed me. That night it was the only thing in the car that felt dependable. I drove with both hands on the wheel, and my father's text glowing on the passenger seat beside me like something poisonous. She really thought she was welcome. I must have read it 20 times before I finally turned the phone face down. Sometimes pain doesn't hit all at once. Sometimes it arrives in waves, each one a little colder than the last. First came confusion, then humiliation, then grief. But under all of that, somewhere lower than hurt, there was something else. Recognition. Because as the miles passed and the dark Wisconsin highway stretched in front of me, I started seeing my life more clearly than I ever had before. Not just Christmas Eve. All of it. And the truth was harder to swallow than the snow. I had been keeping that family afloat for nearly 12 years. Not because anyone asked directly. Families like mine rarely ask directly. They hint. They sigh. They mention. They make their emergencies sound accidental until your love turns into obligation. And little by little, if you aren't careful, your kindness becomes part of their household budget. It started after my divorce. My ex-husband Thomas left when I was 30, and he left the way some men do, quietly, efficiently, and with most of the money. No screaming, no affair that I could prove. Just a woman at his office who suddenly became his wife 9 months later, and a lawyer who spoke in gentle tones while dismantling 15 years of my life. I never had children. That was a grief I learned to carry privately. So when my marriage ended and my small house in Madison felt too quiet, I did what a lot of women like me do. I poured myself into family. My mother Eleanor had always said, when your own life falls apart, help someone else hold theirs together. I don't think she meant for me to disappear doing it. At first it was small things. Derek had fallen behind on the propane bill one brutal January after the transmission went out in his truck. Just this once, he said. I'll pay you back by spring. He never did. Then Vanessa needed help covering braces for little Emma. Then my father's blood pressure medication wasn't fully covered. Then the roof on the rental cottage needed patching. Then Derek's insurance premium jumped. Then there was a furnace repair, then school clothes, then a deductible, then another emergency. Always temporary, always just until next month. Always because, we're good for it. And maybe the saddest part is that I believed them. Not because I was naive, because I wanted to believe helping meant I belonged. By the time I was 40, half my checking account had become a safety net for people who barely remembered to ask how I was doing. I told myself it was because I was the stable one, the responsible one, the unmarried one, the one with no children, the one with a decent bookkeeping job and no one else depending on her. That's how families explain your sacrifice to you, as if your loneliness is free labor. The first person who ever tried to warn me was my mother. Not directly. Eleanor Morgan wasn't a woman who said hard things straight. She had spent 46 years married to my father by then, and women of her generation often learn to survive by speaking sideways. But one spring afternoon 3 years earlier, I was standing in her kitchen peeling potatoes while she stirred gravy on the stove. She watched me write another check for the electric company. Then she said quietly, "You know, helping and being used can look alike for a long time." I remember laughing. "Mom, it's family." She kept stirring. "That's usually who does it." At the time, I thought she was just tired, or worried, or being a mother in the way mothers sometimes become protective long after their daughters are grown. I didn't realize she was trying to tell me something she couldn't say with my father in the next room. The farmhouse itself had been in our family for almost 70 years. Hemlock Pines Farm and Cottages sat on 15 acres outside La Crosse, with 2 small rental cabins near the lake and a weathered red barn that leaned just enough to make visitors nervous. My grandfather built the place after returning from Korea, and my mother used to say every floorboard in that house knew our name. When I was little, Christmas there felt magical. The whole house smelled like cedar and cloves. My mother hung dried orange slices in the windows. My father cut fresh pine branches and laid them over the mantel. Derek and I would race down the hallway in wool socks while Bing Crosby sang from the radio in the kitchen. Back then, my father still laughed. Back then, Derek still looked at me like I mattered. Back then, family meant something warm. But time can turn even beloved houses into stages where people perform versions of themselves they want others to believe. And no one performed harder than Vanessa. My sister-in-law had mastered the art of looking perfect while everything underneath quietly rotted. Vanessa never raised her voice, never forgot a thank you note, never showed up without lipstick. She posted soft-lit photographs online of homemade cinnamon rolls and matching pajamas and family blessings under every Christmas tree. To anyone outside, she looked like the kind of woman who held everything together. But I had seen the little cracks, the way she smiled with only her mouth, the way her hand tightened around Derek's arm when money came up, the way she asked questions that sounded casual but never were. "Clara, are you still listed as emergency contact for your parents' insurance? Clara, your credit score must still be excellent, right? Clara, did your bank ever raise your line of credit after the divorce?" At the time, I thought she was making conversation. Now, driving alone through a snowstorm with mascara drying on my face, those questions came back one by one like matches being struck in a dark room. And for the first time, I wondered whether Christmas Eve had not been the beginning. Maybe it was only the first time they stopped pretending. My phone rang just as I crossed into Madison County. Derek's name lit up the screen. I stared at it. The sound filled the car. Once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time, it was Vanessa. I didn't answer that one either. By the time I pulled into my driveway just after midnight, there were 6 missed calls waiting for me, and 1 voicemail from my father. I sat in the dark car, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, while his voice came through the speaker. "Clara," he said sharply, "your brother says you left. Call me when you get this. You're acting childish." Childish. I laughed then. Actually laughed. Because after standing in the snow, while my own family shut the door in my face, I was the childish one. And standing in my own driveway, with the porch light reflecting off untouched snow, I realized something that changed everything. I had spent years asking whether they loved me. I had never once asked whether they respected me. And that was the question that finally mattered. Morning came without softness. No gentle light through curtains. No birdsong. No peaceful sense of rest. Just a gray Wisconsin dawn pressing against my windows like it wanted to get inside my house and sit down with me. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door again, Derek's hand on the handle, the narrow crack of warmth, the sound of laughter behind it, and then that sentence. She really thought she was welcome. By sunrise, my phone had stopped ringing. Not because they understood, because they were regrouping. I knew my family well enough to recognize the pattern now. First comes confusion, then panic, then anger, then negotiation disguised as concern. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop, the same laptop I had used for years to manage their lives. I opened my banking app. For a long time, I just looked at the list. Propane company, autopay. Insurance, autopay. Truck loan, Derek, autopay. Medical copays, my father's account, linked to mine. Farm utilities, Hemlock Pines, farm and cottages. Line after line of quiet responsibility. Each one a thread tied to me. Each one invisible to them when it was working. Each one suddenly very visible when it stopped. My finger hovered over the first cancellation. I remember thinking, if I do this, everything changes. Not just bills. Identity. Because for years, I had been the one who prevented consequences from ever reaching them. I had been the buffer between their choices and their outcomes. And buffers are never thanked. They're only noticed when they're gone. I clicked Cancel Autopay on the propane account first. A small action. Almost quiet, but something inside me shifted the moment I did it. Not relief. Not revenge. Something closer to air returning to a room that had been sealed too long. One by one, I went through them. Truck loan, insurance, medical copays, utilities, farm maintenance accounts. Each click felt like loosening a knot I had been tied in without realizing. By the time I finished, my hands were steady. That frightened me more than anything, because grief is supposed to shake you. But this felt like clarity. It was just after 9 in the morning when my phone exploded again. Derek first, then Vanessa, then my father, then again. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it started again immediately. This time I answered, not because I was ready, because I needed to hear what panic sounds like when it realizes it has nowhere to go. Derek's voice came through first, sharp and already breaking at the edges. Clara, what did you do? I leaned back in my chair. I canceled what I was paying for. You can't just, our propane is shut off. I closed my eyes. So pay it. Silence. Then Vanessa, taking the phone. Her voice was different than last night. Last night she had been silent behind the door. Today she was careful. Clara, she said softly. There must be some misunderstanding. We didn't think you'd react like this. I laughed once. A short, humorless sound. That's interesting, because I didn't think you'd shut me out on Christmas Eve. Another pause. Then my father came on the line, not asking, not apologizing, commanding. This is not how we handle family matters. Something in me went still again. That phrase, we don't handle it like this, meaning, we do not disrupt the system that benefits us. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, snow was still falling lightly, covering the street in a clean white that made everything look untouched. I'm not handling anything, I said quietly. I'm just stopping. Stopping what? Derek snapped. Funding it. That word landed heavier than I expected. Funding, because that was what it had become, hadn't it? Not helping, not sharing. Funding, a system where I paid and they lived and no one named it out loud. Vanessa tried again. We'll sort it out, Clara. Just turn everything back on. It's Christmas week. The kids. I interrupted her. You used my name on the refinance paperwork. Silence. Not confusion this time. Silence like a door locking. I walked back to the table and opened my email. I got the notification from the bank, I continued. So let's not pretend this is about propane. No one spoke. And in that silence, I heard it the shift. The conversation changing shape. From panic to damage control. From family to business. Then Derek exhaled sharply. You weren't supposed to see that yet. There it was. The truth slipping out like a blade left too close to the surface. I sat down again. See what? Vanessa's voice returned quickly. Too quickly. Clara, it's just a refinance for the farm. Nothing major. We were going to explain. Explain what? I said quietly. That you used my financial identity without my consent? Another pause. Then my father, suddenly older in tone. Clara, don't make this legal. And that was when I knew. Because people only say that when they already have. I opened the document the bank had sent. And there it was, my name, listed as guarantor, without my signature, without my approval. attached to a refinancing package for Hemlock Pines Farm and Cottages, with a secondary entity listed underneath, Ironwood Holdings, LLC, owned by Vanessa M. Calloway. My stomach went cold. Not from surprise, from recognition, because I had seen Vanessa researching investment restructuring on her laptop last summer at a barbecue. I had seen Derek laughing it off when I asked what it was, and I had heard my father say, "Vanessa is just helping us modernize the property paperwork." Modernize. Such a harmless word. Such a dangerous disguise. I leaned forward slowly. "Tell me what Ironwood Holdings is," I said. No answer. So I read it aloud from the document. The phone line went so quiet I could hear the wind outside my house through the glass. Then Derek spoke, low and defensive. "It's just a holding company. It helps with taxes. It's not what you think." But I was already scrolling. And that's when I saw the clause. A refinancing trigger condition. If the guarantor defaults or revokes consent, ownership structure transfers. Automatically. My breath stopped, because that meant the moment I canceled payments, I had also triggered the legal pathway for control shift. Not because I was careless, but because someone had built it that way, deliberately. My hand tightened around the phone. "You set me up," I said. "No," Vanessa said quickly, too quickly again. "It's just structured finance." "Don't," I interrupted. My voice was quieter now, strangely calm. "Don't explain it to me like I'm stupid." Silence again. Longer this time. Then my father spoke, and the authority in his voice was gone for the first time I could remember. "Clara, we can fix this." Fix. Another word people use when they mean, make it go away. I closed my eyes. And in that moment, I realized something that hurt more than betrayal itself. They had not only shut me out, they had planned for me to be useful while I was excluded. That is a different kind of cruelty. One that wears the mask of practicality. "I need a lawyer," I said quietly. Derek's voice sharpened instantly. "What?" I said I need a lawyer. Vanessa inhaled sharply. "Clara, please don't escalate this." But I had already hung up. My hand was steady as I set the phone down. For a long moment, I just sat there in the quiet kitchen, snowlight filtering through the window, coffee cooling untouched, and the sound of my own heartbeat finally matching something solid inside me. Not anger, not panic. Decision. I reached for my coat, because whatever came next, I was no longer going to face it alone. I didn't go to them first. That was the first real change in me. Because the old Clara would have picked up the phone, tried to smooth it over, tried to understand, tried to keep the peace, even while she was bleeding internally. But the woman who stepped out into that cold morning wasn't that version anymore. She had learned something in a snowstorm. Peace isn't something you keep at your own expense. It's something you protect. I drove across town with the heater barely keeping up, my mind replaying the documents over and over again like a loop I couldn't turn off. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but inside everything was rearranging itself. Not falling apart, rebuilding. I didn't go to a cafe to cry. I didn't call a friend to collapse into. I went straight to Hartley Legal Offices on Monroe Street. The sign outside was modest, no grand glass building, no intimidating architecture, just a small brick office with frost clinging to the edges of the windows. That alone made me breathe differently, because I didn't need spectacle. I needed truth. Inside, the warmth hit me first, then the smell of old paper and faint coffee. A receptionist looked up as I walked in, her expression calm in that practiced way people in legal offices always have. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak to someone about financial fraud," I said. No hesitation, no emotional buildup, just fact. That sentence alone felt like crossing a line I had stood behind for years. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Have a seat. Miss Hartley will be with you shortly." I sat in a chair that was slightly too firm, hands folded in my lap, staring at a framed certificate on the wall I didn't read. I kept thinking about the farm. Hemlock Pines, my grandfather's land, my mother's voice in the kitchen, my childhood running through those fields. And now, someone had turned it into a transaction. A structure. À transfert, à calculation. When attorney Joan Hartley walked in, she wasn't what I expected. No sharp heels clicking like courtroom drama. No cold stare of judgment. Just a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, a wool cardigan, and a pen tucked behind her ear like she'd forgotten it was there. She looked at me for exactly 3 seconds before saying, "You didn't come here for advice. You came here because something already happened." That stopped me. Because she was right. I nodded once. She sat down. "Tell me." So I did. I told her everything. The snowstorm. The door. The text. The cancellations. The refinance. The LLC. I expected her to interrupt me. She didn't. She just listened, pen moving slowly across her notepad, occasionally pausing like she was connecting invisible threads. When I finished, the silence between us felt heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, she leaned back. "Okay," she said. "We're dealing with 3 separate issues here." I blinked. 3? She ticked them off calmly. 1. Financial coercion within a family structure. 2. Unauthorized use of identity in a secured refinancing agreement. 3. Potential fraudulent transfer mechanism involving an LLC. My stomach tightened. "That sounds serious." She gave a faint, almost tired smile. "It is, but it's also fixable if we act quickly." The word quickly made something in me shift. Because I realized my family was not just panicking. They were probably already moving. "Can they take the property?" I asked. Joan didn't answer immediately. That was worse than a yes. Finally, she said, "Not if we freeze the transaction before it executes. But you need to understand something. Whoever structured this didn't improvise it." I felt my throat tighten. "You mean Vanessa?" "I mean someone who knew exactly how to place pressure points in a system," she corrected gently, "and used your name as leverage." I stared at the table. So this wasn't a family misunderstanding. It was engineered. Joan stood up. "I'm going to file an emergency injunction today. We'll notify the bank, the title office, and the LLC registry. But I need one thing from you." "What? Are you prepared for this to destroy your family relationship?" The question landed harder than anything else. Because up until that moment, some small part of me still wanted to believe there was a version of this where everyone just misunderstood each other, where I could fix it, and we could all sit at Christmas dinner next year like nothing happened. But sitting there, I understood something painfully clear. They hadn't misunderstood me. They had used me. I looked up at her. "I think they already destroyed it," I said quietly. Joan nodded once. "Then we protect what's left of yours." That sentence stayed with me as I left her office. What's left of yours. Not theirs. Not yours. Mine. By the time I got home, the first real escalation had already begun. My phone was flooded. Messages from Derek. "Call me now. You are ruining everything. This is insane." From Vanessa. "Clara, please. This is a misunderstanding. We can fix it privately." From my father. "Stop this immediately." But one message stood out. It wasn't angry. It was scared. From Derek. "The bank is calling us. What did you do?" I stared at that last line longer than the others. Because there it was again. Not accountability. Not explanation. Just panic at consequences arriving too early. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and watched the afternoon light fade into early evening. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding something together. I felt like I had finally stopped holding it at all. That night, Joan called me directly. "We filed," she said. "Already?" Emergency filings move fast when fraud is involved. I closed my eyes. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "we wait for them to realize the system isn't bending anymore." And she was right. Because exactly 43 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Derek. It wasn't Vanessa. It was my father. And when I answered, his voice wasn't commanding anymore. It was controlled panic wrapped in anger. "Clara," he said tightly, "you've involved lawyers?" I said nothing. "You're freezing accounts? You're blocking refinancing? Do you understand what this will do to the farm?" I walked to the window. Outside, snow had started falling again, softer now, almost quiet. I understand exactly what it will do, I said. His voice sharpened. This is family property. A pause. Then I said the words that changed everything between us. No, I replied. It's property you tried to move without my consent. Silence. For the first time, he didn't have an immediate answer. Then quieter. You're embarrassing this family. That sentence should have hurt me. A year ago, it would have. But standing there, I finally saw it for what it was. Not shame. Control. I exhaled slowly. I think you mean I'm stopping it from continuing. And I hung up. The house was silent after that. Not empty. Just finally mine. And somewhere in that silence, I understood something I had spent my whole life avoiding. Boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal what was never stable to begin with. The first time I saw Derek after everything started unraveling, it wasn't at the farm. It was in a parking lot behind a closed grocery store just outside Madison. Joan had told me not to meet them alone. She said it clearly. Whatever they're feeling right now, it's not stable. Don't go into emotional territory without legal clarity around you. But I wasn't going there to argue. I was going there because something in me needed to see what they looked like when the system they built stopped working. Because for years, I had only ever seen my family in one condition: comfortable. Not rich, not struggling. Comfortable enough that someone else was always absorbing the pressure. That someone had been me. Derek was already there when I arrived, leaning against his truck. The same truck I had helped keep insured. The same truck I had once paid a repair bill for in the middle of a winter when he said he couldn't afford to miss work. Now it sat there like a symbol of something I hadn't fully named until this moment. Ownership. Not just of property, but of expectation. He straightened when he saw me. For a second, I almost recognized my brother. The one who used to sneak me chocolate when Mom wasn't looking. The one who used to fix my bike chain when I was 12. The one who once said, "I've got you, Clara," like it meant something permanent. But that version of him didn't step forward. This one did. And he was angry. "You brought lawyers into this?" he said immediately. I didn't answer right away. I studied him instead. The tension in his jaw. The exhaustion in his eyes. The way he kept shifting his weight like he couldn't stand still in his own skin. "I didn't bring lawyers into anything," I said finally. "You did that when my name appeared on documents I never signed." He scoffed. "Vanessa was just trying to streamline things. You always make things sound worse than they are." That sentence? Always, like I had been the problem for noticing. I stepped closer. "I didn't make anything worse, Derek." I stopped participating. That made him pause. Just for a second. And I saw it confusion underneath the anger. Because people like Derek don't recognize withdrawal as resistance. Only disruption. "You shut off everything," he said. "Do you have any idea what the bank is doing to us right now?" I almost laughed. "Oui?" His face tightened. "Don't start that." I nodded slowly. "No, let's start exactly there." I gestured between us. "You and Vanessa and Dad made decisions using my name, my credit, my money, and now I'm supposed to call it us when consequences arrive." He looked away for a second. That flicker mattered more than anything else, because it meant he knew. Not fully, but enough. When he looked back at me, his voice lowered. "You're punishing the whole family over pride." That word again, pride. They always called it pride when I stopped being useful. I shook my head. "This isn't pride," I said quietly. "This is me no longer being your financial backup system." The wind picked up between us, cold slicing through the empty lot. Derek ran a hand over his face. "You don't understand what's happening at the farm right now." "I understand enough," I replied. He exhaled sharply. "Vanessa's been handling everything. The refinance was supposed to secure long-term stability. You freezing it could cost us the entire property." There it was, the shift, from anger to fear. And underneath fear, blame. I nodded slowly. "So why did my signature need to be added without me knowing?" Silence. That was the real answer. Because there was no innocent explanation left that could survive daylight. Behind him, a car door opened. Vanessa stepped out. Perfect posture. Coat buttoned neatly. Hair still flawless despite everything collapsing around her. Even now she looked composed. But her eyes were not. They were sharp, measuring. She walked toward us like she was stepping into a negotiation room, not a crisis. "Clara," she said softly, "this is getting out of control." I looked at her, really looked, and I remembered all the small things, the questions, the careful phrasing, the financial curiosity disguised as casual conversation, the way she always seemed to know exactly how far she could push before someone else would step in and absorb the risk. "Me." I said nothing. She continued, "We never intended for you to feel excluded." That made something inside me go very still, because exclusion wasn't the issue. Usage was. "You used my identity on a legal document," I said evenly. She sighed like I was missing the point. "It's a standard guarantor structure." I tilted my head slightly. "Without my consent?" A pause. Then she said it. The sentence that confirmed everything. "We assumed you would understand." Assumed. Not asked. Not informed. Assumed. I nodded slowly. And that was the moment something shifted in all three of us. Because they expected me to argue, to get emotional, to raise my voice, to collapse into the familiar role of the fixer. Instead, I stepped back. "I understand perfectly," I said. Derek frowned. "Clara?" "No," I interrupted gently. "Let me finish." I looked between them, and I spoke calmly, almost quietly. "You built financial decisions around my silence. You structured agreements around my trust. And when I stopped being available to absorb the fallout, you called it disruption." Neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left to reframe. I continued, "I'm not blocking anything anymore. I'm just not participating." Vanessa's expression tightened for the first time. "Where's this coming from?" she asked. That question almost made me sad, because it implied this was sudden, as if years of invisible labor could not possibly produce an ending. I exhaled. "It's been coming for a long time," I said. Then I looked at Derek. "Last Christmas was just the first time you noticed I stopped agreeing quietly." His jaw tightened. "You're really going to let lawyers take the farm from us?" That was the final pivot. Not responsibility, not acknowledgement, just loss framed as theft. I shook my head. "I'm not taking anything from you." A pause. Then I added, "I'm removing myself from what you built using me." Silence stretched between us. Cold, heavy, final. Vanessa spoke again, softer now. "There's still time to fix this privately." I looked at her for a long moment, and I realized something with absolute clarity. She didn't want resolution. She wanted control restored quietly. So I said the only honest thing left. "No," I replied. "There isn't." Then I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't look behind me. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time, I didn't need to. And as I drove away, I understood something that felt both terrifying and freeing. Sometimes the end of family doesn't look like a fight. By the time everything became public, it wasn't dramatic in the way people imagine betrayal to be. No shouting in courtrooms. No cinematic confrontation under bright lights. It was paperwork. Emails. Bank notices. A legal freeze that moved through the system quietly but efficiently like frost spreading across glass. And yet, somehow, that silence made it louder. Because once the banks confirmed the irregularity, once the title office flagged the refinance, once the LLC registration tied to Vanessa Calloway was reviewed under scrutiny, there was no more hiding behind family language. There was only documentation. And documentation doesn't care who you used to be at Christmas dinner. The first real public consequence came 3 days later. I wasn't there when it happened. I was at Joan Hartley's office when she received the confirmation call. She put it on speaker. Her expression didn't change much, but I saw it in her eyes the moment everything locked into place. "The refinance has been frozen pending investigation," the bank representative said. "The guarantor signature mismatch triggered an internal fraud review. We've also placed a hold on associated transfers linked to Ironwood Holdings LLC." Joan nodded once. "And the property?" A pause. "Status is unchanged for now, but under review." When she ended the call, she looked at me. "This is no longer just a family dispute," she said quietly. "It's a financial crime investigation." I didn't feel victorious hearing that. I felt strangely still. Because once something becomes official like that, it stops belonging to emotion. It becomes process. But I still didn't want destruction. I never did. What I wanted was for it to stop. Meanwhile, back at Hemlock Pines, the consequences arrived all at once. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of unravelings that stacked too quickly to manage. The propane company cut service first. Then the truck loan flagged delinquency. Then the insurance provider suspended coverage due to payment reversal. And then the most important call, the bank notifying Walter Morgan that the refinance could not proceed under current legal conditions. That was the one that broke the illusion. Because for years, my father had built his authority on the idea that things would always work out. Not because they were stable, but because I was there. When that buffer disappeared, everything underneath became visible. And what emerged was not leadership. It was panic. Vanessa tried to contain it with posts first. I found out later through a cousin who still followed her online. Pictures of the farmhouse at sunset. Captioned, "Grateful for family, even in hard seasons." Another, "Some misunderstandings only make us stronger." But the comments stopped being supportive quickly. Because people notice when stories don't match outcomes. And when utilities are shut off in rural Wisconsin winter, no amount of filtered photography fixes reality. Derek's situation collapsed fastest. The truck he had insisted was essential for work was repossessed after the loan flagged irregular guarantor authorization. His employer, already uncomfortable with delayed deliveries, began reviewing his contract reliability. And then came the lake house deposit, a non-refundable payment tied to his future stability plan with Vanessa. Gone. When I later heard that, I didn't smile. I just felt tired. Because consequences always sound cleaner in theory than they feel in real life. But the most significant public moment didn't happen to Derek or Vanessa. It happened to my father. Walter Morgan had always been respected in our small community, not because he was particularly powerful, but because he projected certainty. He knew how to speak in rooms where people didn't interrupt him. He knew how to make decisions sound like tradition. And he knew how to make disagreement feel like disrespect. But authority built on unchallenged systems doesn't survive exposure. When the legal inquiry reached him, when the refinancing documents were reviewed line by line, when his signature history and approval chain were requested, something cracked. Not loudly, just enough that people started asking questions he couldn't answer as confidently as before. And in small towns, uncertainty spreads faster than fire. The first time I saw him after that was not planned. He came to Joan's office. I didn't know he would be there until I heard his voice in the hallway. Lower than usual. Less controlled. "Clara needs to end this," he was saying. "This is destroying everything we've built." I stayed in the room while Joan opened the door slightly. "Mr. Morgan," she said evenly, "this is an active legal matter. Any concerns should be directed through counsel." My father's voice sharpened. "She is my daughter." And Joan didn't even blink. "Then she is also your client's protected party in a financial fraud investigation." Silence. That word again. Fraude. It removes emotion from the sentence. My father stepped inside anyway, and when I saw him, I understood something I had never allowed myself to fully see before. He looked smaller. Not physically, but structurally, like someone who had always stood on familiar ground and suddenly realized the ground had rules he never acknowledged. His eyes found mine immediately. "Clara," he said quietly. "No authority. No command. Just my name." For a second, I almost responded the old way. The way daughters respond when fathers say their name like a summons. But I didn't. I stayed seated. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You're really going to take this to the end." It wasn't a question. It was recognition. I answered carefully. "I didn't take it anywhere," I said. "I stopped preventing it from reaching you." His jaw tightened. Behind him, Joan watched without interfering. The room felt very still. Then he said something quieter. "You've embarrassed this family." I nodded slowly. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to absorb that statement. I think, I said calmly, you mean I stopped protecting it from consequences. That landed differently. He didn't respond immediately, because there was nothing left to reposition. Not for him, not for me. After a long silence, he turned slightly toward the door, and before leaving, he said something almost under his breath. You didn't have to do this. I looked at him then, really looked, and I realized how many years that sentence had shaped my behavior. You didn't have to do this, meaning, you didn't have to stop making things easier for us. I spoke softly. No, I said. I didn't have to keep doing it either. And then he left. Not dramatically, not angrily, just leaving a space that no longer required him. After he was gone, Joan closed the file in front of her. The investigation will continue, she said, but the immediate risk to your name and assets is contained. I nodded, but my attention wasn't on the paperwork anymore. It was on something else. On the absence, not of people, but of pressure. For years, my life had been shaped around anticipating other people's crises. And now, for the first time, there was nothing to anticipate, only space. And space can feel unfamiliar when you've never had it. Outside the office window, snow was melting slightly under pale winter sun, not disappearing, just changing form. And I realized then that what had happened wasn't just exposure. It was separation. Not violent, not cruel, just final. The strangest part of losing a family is how quiet your house becomes afterward. Not because people were physically there before. Most of them hadn't stepped inside my home in months. But because for years, even in silence, they had occupied space in me. Their bills, their emergencies, their expectations, their moods. Even when the phone wasn't ringing, some part of me was always waiting for it to. Waiting for the next small favor. Waiting for the next temporary problem. Waiting for the next crisis that somehow became mine. When all of that stopped, I didn't feel freedom right away. I felt withdrawal. For the first 2 weeks after the legal freeze, I kept reaching for my phone every morning expecting another disaster. Some angry voicemail from Derek. Some careful message from Vanessa. Some wounded accusation from my father. But after the lawyers got involved, the calls slowed, then stopped. And the silence that followed felt heavier than the conflict. I didn't know what to do with my own life when no one else was consuming it. That may sound dramatic to some people, but women like me understand exactly what I mean. Sometimes you can spend so many years being needed that you forget how to simply exist. The first person who came to see me was my mother. Eleanor showed up on a Thursday afternoon carrying a tin of shortbread cookies she didn't need to bring. That was her way. Women of her generation often carried comfort in their hands because they were never taught how to carry it in words. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just tired in a way that seemed older than her age. For a second, we just stood there, neither of us quite sure what shape this new relationship was supposed to take. Then she held up the cookie tin and said softly, I didn't know whether to call first. That nearly broke me. Because my own mother had begun treating me like someone she needed permission to approach. I stepped aside. You never have to call first. She nodded and came inside. I'm Duhuad. She sat at my kitchen table, turning the edge of the tin slowly in her hands. The kettle hummed. The radiator clicked. Outside, snow slid off the roof in soft little thumps. For a while, neither of us said what we both came there to talk about. That's another thing grief does. It makes ordinary sounds feel louder than language. When I finally sat down across from her, she looked at me with eyes that had loved me long before I understood what love could cost. Then she said quietly, I should have stopped it sooner. I stared at her. What? She swallowed. All of it. And for the first time in my life, my mother began telling me the truth. Not the softened version. Not the careful family version. The truth. She told me she had known Vanessa was pushing Walter toward the refinance. She told me she had seen papers on the kitchen table months earlier with my name typed across them. She told me she had asked Derek why my credit history was being discussed. And what did he say? I asked. She looked down. He said, "You always help." Those 4 words hit me harder than the legal documents ever had. Because that was it. That was the entire architecture of what had happened. You always help. Not, she agrees. Not, she understands. Not, she chooses. Just, she always helps. As if my history of love had become permission. My mother looked at me then, and her voice cracked in a way I had almost never heard. I kept thinking someone would stop before it went too far. I sat very still. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes filled slowly. Because for 40 years in that house, I learned that peace often came from staying quiet. That sentence settled into the room between us like something sacred and painful. And suddenly, I didn't just see my own life. I saw hers too. All the years she had spent making herself smaller so everyone else could remain comfortable. All the ways women are taught to call survival patience. I reached across the table and took her hand. It felt colder than I expected. "You don't have to do that with me," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she whispered something I still carry. "I think you're the first woman in this family who decided not to inherit it." I cried then. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that shakes. Just quiet tears sliding down my face while my mother held my hand in my own kitchen, like we were meeting each other honestly for the first time. That afternoon changed something in both of us. Because for the first time, we were not talking as mother and daughter trapped inside the same family system. We were just 2 women sitting in the truth. A few weeks later, Joan called with the final update. The transfer to Ironwood Holdings had been permanently blocked. My name was removed from every related document. The refinance collapsed. The property remained legally protected under its original structure until my mother could decide what she wanted independently. "Vanessa won't be able to move anything without direct review now," Joan said. "And Derek?" She paused. "His financial exposure is significant." That was lawyer language for his life was about to become very expensive. I thanked her and hung up. Then I stood in my kitchen for a long time staring at nothing. Because after months of fear and anger and unraveling, it was over. Not cleanly, not beautifully, but over. Derek lost the truck. The lake house deposit disappeared. Vanessa stopped posting perfect family photos online. My father stopped calling. And my mother began spending more afternoons at my house than at the farm. Not because she left him. Not right away. But because sometimes healing starts as simply as knowing there is another room you can breathe in. As for me, I did something I had not done in years. I booked a trip, just for myself. No one else. No emergency. No obligation. A small cabin on the Oregon coast in early spring. Nothing dramatic. Just ocean. Rain. Silence. I remember standing on that shoreline the first morning, cold wind in my hair, watching waves erase footprints almost as soon as they appeared. And I realized something I wish I had learned 20 years earlier. Some people mistake your love for access. They think because you have been generous, they are entitled. Because you have been patient, you will remain available. Because you have forgiven before, you will forgive forever. But love without boundaries is not kindness. It is surrender. And surrender can look noble for a very long time before it starts destroying you. By the time I came home from Oregon, my house no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. And there is a difference. A profound one. Because emptiness aches. Peace lets you breathe. Even now, when Christmas comes around, I still think about that porch, the snow in my hair, the pie cooling in my hands, the sound of my brother's voice telling me I did not belong in a place I had loved my whole life. For a long time, I believed that was the moment everything broke. But the truth is, that was only the moment I finally heard the break. Because some hearts do not shatter all at once. Some hearts crack slowly, quietly, over years of being asked to give more than they were ever meant to carry. And sometimes the most painful thing is not realizing people can hurt you. It is realizing they had grown comfortable watching you hurt for them. I did not walk away with revenge. That is important for me to say, because people often hear stories like mine and think the ending is about punishment. It was not. Derek losing his truck was not my revenge. Vanessa losing control was not my revenge. My father losing authority was not my revenge. Those were consequences, and consequences are not cruelty. They are simply the moment other people finally have to carry the weight they placed on you. What I walked away with was something much quieter than revenge. I walked away with peace. Not perfect peace, not painless peace, just the kind that comes when you stop betraying yourself to remain acceptable to others. And if I learned anything through all of it, it was this. Boundaries are not walls. They are instructions. They teach people how your heart can be handled, how your time can be valued, how your love can be received, and how your future must never again be used as collateral for someone else's comfort. Some people will call that selfish, usually the people who benefited most from your lack of boundaries. But protecting yourself is not selfish. Sometimes it is the first honest thing you have ever done. And I still think about my mother's words. You're the first woman in this family who decided not to inherit it. Maybe that was the real gift hidden inside all that pain. Not losing my family, but finally finding myself outside of what they expected me to be. So I want to ask you something tonight. Have you ever mistaken loyalty for love so long that you forgot what respect was supposed to feel like? If you have, I want you to know this. It is never too late to choose yourself. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if the people around you call it betrayal, sometimes the people most offended by your boundaries were the ones who needed them all along. And if this story stayed with you, tell me, would you have done what I did? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this remind you that healing is possible, even after heartbreak, then stay with me, because sometimes the stories we survive are the very ones that help someone else finally save themselves.